Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for joining our training session today. This is our third and last session of our training on carbon trading. We had our first session on the 22nd of August, and we were looking at the key concepts of carbon trading, types of carbon trading, carbon market mechanisms, and we are looking at the legal and regulatory framework, market trends, and future outlook in carbon trading. And we are also looking at risk management in carbon trading. So in this session today, our seasoned experts will be looking at carbon certifications and standards, international best practices in carbon market regulations. This training is organized by the East African Wildlife Society in collaboration with A&O Shearman and the international lawyers. You can start by introducing yourself and the organization you represent and where you are joining us from in the chat box. You can also put through your thoughts, your insights, your questions on the chat box, and during the Q&A session, which will be at the end of this training, to our speakers. We are also looking to improve future training sessions, and so we'll be sharing a link to our evaluation form, and so kindly take a minute to give your feedback. So at this point, I welcome you all to this training session, and I welcome Teresa to introduce the speakers of today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne, and feel most welcome to this session. In this session, we have our seasoned speakers from A&O Shearman. We have Wilf Odgers, who's a senior associate in London. Wilf has a broad financial regulatory practice, and he is well adept in advising financial institutions, including banks, brokers, exchanges, clearing houses, fund managers, insurers, corporates, and other end users. Wilf has a diverse work experience, which involves advising on legal and regulatory issues arising in clients' businesses, including structuring regulatory authorizations and licensing, change of control, compliance policies and procedures, client agreements, and terms of business, including incident management, investigations, enforcement, and financial services disputes work. Wilf will take us through the topics in the session, and he will be assisted by Ned Walker. And I'd like to take this opportunity to invite Ned Walker to introduce himself to the audience as well. Thank you.
Hi there. Thanks very much, Teresa. Yes, I've been working alongside Wilf in his financial institutions practice, so advising him, advising lots of the same entities as he does, and really great to be speaking to all of you today. And I'll be taking you through the latter half of the session on some of the best practices around regulation after Wilf has covered off some of the certification topics. So look forward to speaking to you more then. Thanks.
Thank you, Ned. On behalf of the East African Wildlife Society and on behalf of Jabez Okumu, who is not here with us today, we want to officially welcome all our audience to our last session. Our aim for this process has been to build a basic understanding of all stakeholders on carbon trading and its contribution to climate change mitigation. And today we are happy that Ned and Wilf will be taking us through the last topics for this discussion today. That is on certification and standards and on international best practices on carbon regulation. I welcome you, Wilf, to start us off and take us through the information on certification and standards for professionals in the carbon trading industry. And I do hope that this session will be equally beneficial to our participants as the others have been. You're most welcome, Wilf.
Thank you very much, Teresa, for the very flattering introduction. So as Teresa mentioned, my name is Will Fodgers, and I'm a lawyer here at A&O Shearman. I specialise in financial services regulatory matters. I have experience of working on several matters in the carbon trading space. And as mentioned, I'm joined here by my colleague Ned Walker, who will speak during the second half of the session. So we anticipate today's session will last an hour or so, inclusive of some time for questions at the end. And if you do have any questions as we go, please do submit them in the chat box, and we'll endeavour to answer as many as we can in the allotted time. And failing that, we'd be happy to sort of answer questions in writing following this session. So next slide, please, Vincent. And again. And again. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. So our work so far with the EAWLS, we've been engaged by the EAWLS to help provide training and support to stakeholders in Kenya, such as yourselves, as the country looks to build out its carbon trading framework. And as Teresa mentioned, this is the third and final training session in a series that we've been hosting. In the first session, we provided an overview of carbon trading, its key concepts and mechanisms. And in the second session last week, we covered the legal and regulatory framework, market trends, risk management, and the future outlook for carbon trading. So today we are going to be covering the role of certification and standards in carbon trading, which I will speak to, along with international best practices on carbon regulation, which Ned will speak to. Now, I'm not proposing, sorry, previous slide again, Vincent. I'm not proposing to give a full recap of what was discussed in the previous sessions, but we thought it'd be useful to provide a very brief overview as a refresher of carbon trading and carbon credits more generally, just so we're all on the same page before we jump into the more detailed matters today. So as I'm sure many of you know, a carbon credit is a tradable certificate, usually equivalent to a ton of CO2 that's not been emitted or absorbed as a result of an environmental protection project carried out with the aim of reducing global emissions of CO2 and other greenhouse gases. So carbon markets are trading systems where those carbon credits are sold and bought. So companies and individuals can use those carbon markets to compensate for their greenhouse gas emissions by purchasing carbon credits from entities that have removed or reduced greenhouse gas emissions through projects. Carbon credits can be traded in two types of markets, voluntary markets, which are very much the focus of this series of training sessions and particularly one today, and mandatory compliance markets. And a voluntary market is a market where organizations and individuals can voluntarily buy and sell carbon credits to offset their greenhouse gas emissions. Conversely, the mandatory compliance carbon credit markets are created by governments to manage and limit the emission of greenhouse gases, famous example being the EU ETS. Large companies from particularly polluting sectors such as refineries, chemical industries, steel mills, operate and are legally required to hold carbon credits to pollute and can sell and purchase these credits for this purpose. So it's a very brief sort of overview and refresher of the background to what we're talking about today. So next slide, please, Vincent, and the next one after that as well, please. Sorry, Vincent, could we have the, yes, perfect. That's great. So certification in carbon credits. So certification is a very critical component that ensures the integrity, transparency, and effectiveness of carbon credit markets. And there are several key reasons why certification is important in our context. First one being credibility, and that comes in several different strands. So credibility on emission savings. Certification ensures that carbon credits are not just theoretical reductions, but that they actually represent real, quantifiable, and additional emissions savings. Secondly, transparency. So certification provides a clear framework for the measurement and reporting of carbon reductions, which is obviously crucial for buyer confidence. A certification system promotes transparency by providing a clear and traceable record of the life cycle of the carbon credit. So that's from generation to retirement. And this transparency is obviously key to preventing issues such as double counting and fraud. Thirdly, compliance with regulations. So certification ensures that carbon credits comply with national and international regulations, including any future agreements under the Paris Agreement, which has been discussed in a previous session. So this compliance is obviously vital for the legality and legitimacy of the trading market in question. Fourth, encouraging best practices. So certification often requires adherence to certain standards and methodologies, which can drive developers of projects to adopt best practices in design, implementation, and monitoring of projects. And finally, on credibility, consistency. So with certification, there becomes a standardized approach to verifying carbon savings, which makes it easier to compare and then trade credits across different projects and jurisdictions where otherwise that might not be possible. Next slide, please. The second sort of category of reasons why certification is vital in relation to carbon credits is for social and environmental reasons, which is obviously a big part. So firstly, ensuring environmental integrity. So certification acts as a guarantee that the carbon credits represent genuine, quantifiable, and additional reductions or removals of greenhouse gases, as sort of touched on earlier. And so it's essential for maintaining the integrity, the environmental integrity of the relevant carbon credit market by ensuring that each credit responds to real world impact. Secondly, supporting sustainable development. So many certification standards, and I'll come on to talk about the main ones later, require that projects in question contribute to sustainable development goals, whether that's improving biodiversity or local community benefits, for example. Third, enhancing social and environmental co-benefits. Similarly, many certification standards include criteria for social and environmental co-benefits, such as community engagement and biodiversity conservation, which brings the broader positive impacts beyond simple carbon reduction. Risk mitigation. Certification reduces the risk of fraud and the potential for carbon leakage, where reductions in emissions in one area might lead to an increase in emissions elsewhere, which obviously renders the whole thing slightly pointless. Next slide, please. So with our sort of markets focused hat on, some other key reasons why certification is important, primarily building market confidence. So if you have a robust certification framework, this instills confidence among market participants, including buyers, sellers, and regulators. And it will provide assurances that the carbon credits in question are credible, and that their investments are indeed contributing to bona fide climate action. And with a confident market, you obviously can attract more investment. Secondly, facilitating international market recognition. So internationally recognized certification standards would enable the integration of the relevant carbon market with the rest of the global markets. And again, that's crucial for attracting international buyers and international investment. and ensuring that the relevant credits are competitive on the world stage, and supporting price stability. So certified carbon credits are more likely to command a stable and potentially higher price in the market, as they're going to be perceived as lower risk and higher quality by investors and regulators alike. Now, as I'll come on to shortly, this is obviously driven slightly by the certification standard in question that is used, and there are many that exist, as I'll talk to now. So the next slide, please, Vincent. So I'm just going to quickly give an overview of the key certification standards globally. So important to note here that there's no single centralized certification standard for carbon credits globally. Instead, various bodies have established different standards, each with different features and points of emphasis. And so it's very much on the project developer to choose which certifications they seek, and then obviously to ensure that the project adheres to the requirements of that particular certification. But it's not the case that there is one, overriding standard that is required of all carbon credits globally. They are very much, it's very much a disparate market, and therefore there needs to be some thought given to which standards are being sought to be adhered with. Some of the main standards include, so the Verified Carbon Standard, also known as the VCS. This is administered by a body called Verra, and this is probably the closest thing we have to a global single standard for carbon credits. It's probably one of the most widely used standards for accounting for greenhouse gas emission reduction, and issuing credible and tradable carbon credits. So some of the key features of the VCS include that it requires rigorous project level greenhouse gas accounting. It involves independent third party verification, and there is a transparent registry system for tracking credit ownership. The VCS ensures through these features that carbon credits represent real additional and quantifiable greenhouse gas reductions, and the standard is very focused, laser focused on greenhouse gas reductions without necessarily taking account of other impacts and other benefits. So it doesn't, as a feature, require products to have additional environmental or social benefits. It's purely focused on greenhouse gas reduction. Secondly is the gold standard. Now, this was established by the WWF and several other NGOs, and this focuses on projects that deliver both climate and sustainable development outcomes. So it's a wider focus than the VCS that I just talked about. Key features of the gold standards include very high project design and implementation requirements, an inclusion of a requirement for local stakeholder consultation, and, as sort of mentioned, an emphasis on delivering measurable contributions to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So, carbon credit accredited by the gold standard provides assurance that a project contributes to broader environmental and social goals beyond just carbon reduction. Third is the Climate Community and Biodiversity Standards, or the CCB. The CCB standards evaluate land management projects that simultaneously address climate change, support local communities, and conserve biodiversity. Key features of the CCB standards include the evaluation of social and environmental impacts alongside GHG greenhouse gas reductions, similarly to the gold standard, and the requirement that projects demonstrate net positive benefits for climate, community, and biodiversity. The CCB standards therefore encourage holistic project approaches that align with broader conservation efforts, so that the CCB is more, you file it more with the gold standard than the VCS. The American Carbon Registry, or ACR, is a non-profit enterprise, and it provides for standards for developing, quantifying, and verifying greenhouse gas offset projects in a voluntary market. Key features of this standard include a comprehensive methodology for greenhouse gas accounting and a transparent public registry for carbon credits. So it's much more similar to the VCS. It helps facilitate high quality carbon offset projects with a focus on innovation and methodology development. And the final one I'll talk to today, although there are plenty of others, but these are probably the main ones, is the Plan Vivo standard. And this is a standard for community-led land use projects that deliver climate change mitigation benefits. Key features of this one include a focus on smallholder and community-led projects, and a requirement for projects to produce a long-term management plan, i.e. the Plan Vivo. Plan Vivo supports projects that empower local communities and promote sustainable land use practices. So there are, as I mentioned, several other standards with different focuses, including certain regional certification regimes. So, the Climate Action Reserve in North America, but that purely focuses on North American projects. Now, next slide, please, Vincent. Thank you. So the process for obtaining certification is going to be slightly different between each certification standard, because they all have their own rules and procedures for applying for certification. So I don't propose to go over each because I don't think that's necessarily useful here. But what I thought it'd be useful to talk to is in general the following steps that are required to be carried out in order to achieve certification for a project. So broadly, there's 5 steps. First step being project design, and this is where the project developer will prepare a project design document that describes the project's objectives, activities, the baseline scenario, emission reduction and removal estimates, a monitoring plan, and safeguards for social and environmental issues where relevant to the standard. The project design document would be required to follow the relevant standard and methodology that the chosen certification body sets out, and they'll each tell you what this needs to look like. This stage is going to involve extensive research and planning to ensure that the project is feasible and that it aligns with the relevant certification criteria. The project developer in question would obviously need to consult with experts and stakeholders to gather any necessary data and address potential challenges. So once the design phase is complete, the next phase is validation, and this will be where the developer submits its project design document to a validation entity, which will be separate from the certification body, but it's an accredited auditor that assesses the project's eligibility, feasibility, and compliance with the relevant certification criteria. This validation entity would conduct a desktop review, a site visit, and a stakeholder consultation, and then would issue a validation report and opinion. The validation report and opinion are then made publicly available for comments and feedback from interested parties. And the purpose of this stage really is to ensure that the project is thoroughly evaluated and that all necessary standards are met before moving forward. So it's a very important stage, and also ensures obviously there's sort of independent voice within the project. So after that, the third phase is registration. And this is where, once the design is complete and validation is complete, the project developer will request the registration of the project with the relevant certification body, which is the formal acceptance of the project as eligible for generating carbon credits once that registration is granted. The certification body then will review the validation report and opinion, as well as any comments received from stakeholders, and will decide whether to approve or reject the registration. There will always be a registration fee that's charged, but this will vary depending on the certification body and the size and the type of the project. So this stage marks the official recognition of the project and its potential to generate carbon credits, which allows it to proceed to the implementation phase. Firstly, though, there's the verification phase. Now, in the verification phase, the project developer will implement the project according to its plan and the monitoring plan, and it will periodically report on the project's performance of emission reduction and removal. Similarly to sort of pre-registration, the project developer will hire a verification entity, which is another accredited auditor that will verify the accuracy and completeness of the reported data and outcomes. Again, this will be via desk review, a site visit, stakeholder consultation, and again, a report and opinion will be issued. And again, open for public comment. So this stage is crucial for ensuring that the project is indeed proceeding along the lines of the plan, and that it is indeed continuing to comply with the requirements of the certification body in question. And so this, obviously provides confidence to buyers and regulators. And then finally, issuance. The project developer will then request the issuance of carbon credits from the certification body, which is the formal recognition of the verified emission reduction or removal achievements of the project. The certification body will review the verification report and any comments received and decide whether to certify the relevant carbon credits. The carbon credits, once issued, are then recorded into a registry system, which can track the ownership and transactions within those carbon credits. And obviously that's crucial for if those carbon credits are going to be admitted to trading, tracking who owns them. So this ensures that the carbon credits are officially recognised and can be traded or sold, which obviously provides financial incentives for the project developer and helps contribute to global emission reduction efforts. So that's a whistle-stop tour through certification. And as I say, I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Ned, who's going to talk everyone through international best practices on carbon regulation. I think you're on mute, Ned.
Michael, kindly unmute Ned.
Yes, I'm unmuted now. Thank you very much, Wilf. And Vincent, could you click through a couple slides, please? Just one more, just to start with. Would be great. Thank you. Thanks very much. So Wilf has focused there on the certification process. So we can kind of see this next bit as a continuation, looking at the best practices on regulation, because obviously after you've successfully designed, registered and issued the credits, you need a market to be able to trade them on. And obviously these markets also need to be regulated. So just looking as a broad overview at the regulatory landscape, for a long time, there was a lack of accepted international best practice on carbon regulation, and specifically the voluntary carbon credit market. As I'm sure some of our colleagues touched on in the previous sessions, because these compliance systems developed more quickly and obviously are slightly different to the voluntary systems kind of lag behind a bit. And various stakeholders in the international community have recognized that. And so they've coalesced around a series of organizations that are designed to promote best practice in the voluntary carbon credit markets and also in carbon markets more generally. And this particularly came after COP26, the Global Climate Conference, which was in 2021. And that was involved a discussion on how the voluntary carbon market would benefit from better oversight and how we could create deeper and more mature markets and their infrastructure that contribute more to emissions reduction. So I'm just going to touch upon some of those key organizations so you can see how they fit into the overall framework and what we're talking about today. So if you could please just go on to the next slide, please, Vincent. Great, thank you. So we've got the Voluntary Carbon Markets Integrity Initiative, which is one of the organizations that came about after COP26. And as the name suggests, this is an organization geared around the creation of what they call high integrity voluntary carbon markets. And the way they do this is they want to engage with stakeholders from civil society, the private sector, and also the local communities in which the carbon credits are going to be produced. And it does work by splitting the carbon market and the voluntary carbon credit market into the demand and supply side. And they've got some very good resources dealing with both sides of that. So on the demand side, they've got a claims code of practice, which is a rule book on how companies can make voluntary use of carbon credits as part of credible science-aligned net zero decarbonisation pathways. And they have core carbon principles which reflect many of the elements of a successful market that I'll go on to talk about later, but also that Wilf has talked about previously. So that's properly certified, properly designed carbon credits that have been verified and validated by appropriate independent bodies. That's a key focus of this organization. And a big part of that as well is registries to track their activities. And also critically that there is no double counting, which I'm sure is a concept that's familiar to people who have sat in these sessions previously, but just as it's a term that you hear a lot in the space, that's just ensuring that emission reductions from carbon credits are only counted once, even when they are traded and circulated around the market. And on the supply side for the VCMI, they have a access strategy toolkit, and that is guidance for countries who want to engage in the voluntary carbon markets in support of their national climate goals and economic prosperity. And that helps countries develop different strategies and different legal approaches to enable them to enter carbon markets and to integrate also in the international markets and be attractive to buyers. So that can range from anything about how you structure things from an institutional level, you know, what national ministries are in charge of the carbon credits program, and also different approaches to key legal things that you'll need to figure out when you have a voluntary carbon credit program. So for example, questions like who owns the land, which differs hugely on an international scale. So Kenya will have one approach, and then other stakeholders, other countries will have different approaches. And then moving on to the task force on scaling voluntary carbon markets. This is a private sector initiative made up of 250 member institutions representing buyers and sellers of carbon credits, standard setters, people in the financial sector, and market infrastructure providers. And that last bit is a key aim of this organization. So it looks about how you can develop proper market infrastructure, because obviously, you know, one part of the piece is doing things correctly on ground level and getting appropriately certified and high integrity carbon credits, but also you need to talk about how you're going to develop markets that can be integrated on a global scale and make sure that they have the ability to trade high volume, have sufficient liquidity, and be sufficiently regulated. And that's something we're going to touch on now. And then finally, we've got the SBTI, which is a science-based targets initiative, and that's just a non-profit body that helps to promote best practice in science-based target setting, helping organizations by providing clearly defined paths to reduce emissions in line with the Paris Agreement goals, because obviously companies and other institutions are now bound by a series of targets that are determined by, you know, very complex scientific calculations and are often the subject of some debate. And these organizations try and disentangle that for companies so they can be compliant, and it helps them to engage with things such as voluntary carbon credit markets, because they're clear on what their obligations are and what targets they need to hit. So if you could just go along to the next slide, please, Vincent, that would be great. So going to look now at the key elements of a successful market, just as an overview slide. And this is going to be a relatively broad brush approach, just so you can see what goes into making a successful market. And this is applicable, obviously, in the carbon credit context, but there are also terms of broad applicability when you look at any market. And so the question, obviously, that lots of people are focusing on is how do you apply these general principles of a successful market to carbon credits specifically? So a market oversight and clarity on who's doing the overseeing is obviously a key element of making a successful market, so that people engaging in the market know who they answer to. And then this also operates on the level of preventing fraud and ensuring market integrity through robust monitoring and reporting systems. And in a carbon credit market, as in any business or any market context, this includes incorporating many of the existing risk management techniques that we see in business and that we also see in markets. You know, for example, the implementation of anti-money laundering and know your customer guidelines coordinated at an international level makes sure that existing regulatory regimes can be harmonized. And this is because, you know, a market in which money or goods of value are exchanged is always going to be susceptible to manipulation, and that's no less true in the carbon credit context or the voluntary context than it is any other market. So having appropriate systems in place to make sure that people who are trading on the markets are overseen effectively is obviously a crucial part of a successful market. And then also we have the regulatory framework. And one of the issues currently or previously that we've had with voluntary carbon credit markets that stakeholders are very keen to address is that there hasn't been a clear approach or a uniform regulatory approach that can be taken and applied elsewhere as to how we regulate carbon markets, and making sure that we have a clear legal structure that defines the roles and the responsibilities and the rights of all market participants within a consistent body of regulation. And obviously, at different governmental levels and within different bodies, there won't be a complete uniformity, but clearly an aim with the voluntary carbon credit market is that we aim to develop different types of regulation that are understandable all across the world to make sure that the market is successful as possible. And then finally, or thirdly, we've got flexibility and standardization. And what's important in any market is that it allows for a range of products, and in this case, a range of products to qualify for credits, which reflects the diversity of potential emission reduction projects over different products, different geographies. One of the great things about carbon credits is that it can reflect emission reduction programs all around the world. a market should be able to accommodate those different types of products and geographies, but then also combining this with appropriate standardization in areas like credit classification and clarity on issues of how these credits are treated, for example, offsetting. So having a sufficient balance between creating a flexible market, but also one that is standardized and has clear regulation and clear oversight is a key aim of a successful market in this case. Finally, we've got transparency, which is that market participants should be transparent in their dealings in the market and provide relevant information to supervisory authorities. There has been obviously progress in terms of transparency over credit integrity and how we approach these credits in the markets, but there has been focus now on getting sufficient price transparency to prevent these risks of manipulation that I referred to, and making sure that we have a market that's transparent enough to incentivize buyers to come to the table and invest in these projects and these credits, and not disincentivize potential purchasers of voluntary carbon credits from entering the market. Next slide, please, Vincent. Great. So now looking more now at the infrastructure of a successful market, and markets all rely on having sufficient data to enable those buying and selling anything of value, anything in the market, allowing them to make informed decisions. Projects that involve voluntary carbon credits are often structured in a very complex way as necessity, because project financing requires various types of hedging arrangements, various types of different structures to ensure that different people can put money in. And that all requires sufficient data as part of the process to make sure that everybody's able to make as informed decision as possible about how to invest. And related to that is also sufficient liquidity, which is making sure that any market in which voluntary carbon credits are traded to make sure is traded at a price which reflects their value at a given moment and supports the development of an active secondary market for these credits. And this isn't just about providing liquidity, but also in the form of voluntary carbon credit markets, centralizing it. There are current pockets of liquidity in voluntary carbon markets, for example, in Expansive, which we'll go on to talk about, which is a voluntary carbon market. But those are often fragmented around different regions and different project types. And it makes it difficult to trade voluntary carbon credits with any liquidity that allows for a good price to be achieved or an accurate price to be achieved. And so when we're looking at the infrastructure for what a voluntary carbon market requires, hopefully they will develop in a way that will allow for sufficient liquidity and trading volumes that will support a high volume infrastructure and the ability to deliver data. So you'll see how all of these things kind of fit into one. Then also looking at regulatory consistency to facilitate the development of a healthy ecosystem for the trading of carbon credits, and also help competitiveness in the carbon credit space, which leads to better projects. A degree of regulatory consistency between different carbon markets is necessary. And I know our colleagues have touched upon the domestic and international regulatory frameworks for voluntary carbon markets in previous sessions, so I won't go over that again. But obviously, clarity from regulators on the legal status of credits and how these credits interact with other areas of law, such as company law and tax, will be a crucial part in developing voluntary carbon markets. And I know, as our colleagues touched upon, Kenya is making efforts to establish a status of carbon credits and clarify it with some of its recent legislation. And now we've got post-trade infrastructure as well. So that's a big focus on the Voluntary Task Force on Scaling Carbon Markets, which is one of the organizations that I mentioned earlier. And that's basically a crucial part of the integrity of the market. And that can be providing custodian services for buyers and suppliers of carbon credits to reduce counterparty risk, creating standardized issuance numbers and underlying registries, which goes back to the certification points that Wilf touched on, which is that not only do you certify a credit, but upon issuance, you make sure that you have a way of tracking its progress. And this boosts market efficiency because there's no friction points from being unable to track or store carbon credits within the market, and therefore confidence. And with the current lack in places that you see of post-trade infrastructure, that has been one of the causes that's prevented scalability. So one of the key aims of some of these bodies that I've mentioned is to make sure that there's a post-trade infrastructure that replicates some of the more successful markets that we see, be they carbon or non-carbon, and enables more confidence and efficiency in the market. And if you could go to the next slide, please, Vincent. Thank you very much. So I'm just going to touch upon now lessons from existing markets. And although the following are compliance models, our colleagues previously have touched upon the interaction between the voluntary and compliance markets, both in terms of their principle and their practice, the way they operate. And obviously some of these compliance models that we see are more mature markets and provide some really good examples of how we can regulate and how we can encourage compliance with regulation in a way that's efficient and effective. So the EU ETS, which is the European Emissions Trading Scheme or system, is the world's first major carbon market and now also its largest. And it provides valuable insights into the importance of both certification, which obviously we've spoken today, and regulation for successful carbon markets. So the first one is the idea of integrated regulation, which is that the EU ETS uses experts from the European Securities and Markets Authority to oversee the functioning of its markets and to report as to whether it functions in a manner comparable to other financial markets. And that touches on one of the points I covered off earlier, which is that one of the key aims of making sure that voluntary carbon markets are working effectively is if they function like a normal market, notwithstanding any of the carbon credit elements. And that's been something that the EU ETS has done really well because it leverages the expertise from market experts to provide them with a clear framework on how they assess their markets. So not only do they have the skills of those market experts, but it allows them to get a viewpoint on whether the markets are functioning. And it also does this additionally by applying appropriate legislative frameworks that it has on markets to its carbon markets and its carbon trading markets. So obviously there are specifics for the EU ETS in terms of their legislation, but they also apply their existing market legislation, for example, the market abuse rules that the EU has, to the trading functions of the market. And this enables existing settled principles of market regulation to be applied to carbon credit schemes. So not only does it provide a ready-made toolkit, but it provides a kind of compliance system that has general applicability and again allows existing market skills and expertise and regulatory compliance that's been developed to be applied to carbon markets rather than starting from scratch, which is a more difficult task. And finally, it also focuses on 11,000 heavy users of energy, including power stations and industrial plants, along with certain airlines. So it focuses on certain entities and has regulatory consistency there, but also, different types of emitters. So it has that combination between flexibility and standardization that we touched upon previously. The California Cap and Trade program, which is the second one down, functions similarly to the ETS, which is that businesses are required to purchase a number of credits a year that match its emissions, and then the number of credits available decrease each year, so that the idea that the compliance system also encourages overall decarbonization of businesses by making it more punitive. And it highlights the role of state-level initiatives and the potential for linking with other markets as well. And one of the things that's interesting about the California cap and trade scheme is it's talking about the decreasing number of credits that it allows. It has a system of allowances where you can buy allowances to use in future, but obviously managing allowances and making sure that emitters can purchase to lower their emissions is a fundamental part of cap and trade schemes, but making sure that this doesn't have the potential to distort the market in the future and pose risks to areas impacted by the supply and use of carbon credits is very important. So making sure that any cap and trade scheme supports overall decarbonisation efforts as part of the goals of the market, and not just purely being seen as a market in which instruments are traded is obviously a very important part of carbon credits markets. Finally, the RGGI, that's a market covering multiple states in the east of the United States of America. And it shows how collaboration can lead to a more efficient market because it was a voluntary market that various states decided to join. And they obviously had to develop it in a way that didn't cover the whole of the United States, but also prevented leakage, which is a very important concept in carbon markets. Wilf touched upon it previously, but in order to harness the benefits of carbon markets, leakage, or that's carbon produced outside of the market's regulatory zone, should be tackled, and you should make sure you don't have emissions that are imported in. So that's when emissions are created outside of the carbon credit program or the regulatory zone, but then brought in for usage within the zone. Even though they do not count in the statistics, they then have an impact on the community that the carbon credit market is meant to serve. So that's a key point that the RGGI has been trying to wrestle with. So hopefully, even though those three schemes are compliance schemes, we've shown you how there are general concepts that are really important across voluntary and cap and trade or compliance schemes, including leakage, as I've talked about, and ensuring that you treat the markets in a way that doesn't distort supply or the ability of emitters to purchase their way out of emissions unnecessarily. And some of the more popular carbon markets that do exist, like Expansive, which I touched upon earlier, is a private market. Those incorporate those more mature voluntary carbon markets incorporate lots of the things that we've been talking about today. So a centralized trade infrastructure, a registry, and a tool that allows you to filter for different types of credits based off their region and their type, and their maturity, their age. So hopefully those lessons from existing markets are helpful in showing you how the foundations of any successful carbon market. And I'm conscious that we're short on time, so I'll just very briefly go on to challenges and opportunities, and then we can move over to any questions, and maybe we can put those in written form as well if we don't have time to answer them today, but we'll discuss that afterwards. So if you go to the next slide, and one more please, Vincent, thank you very much. So just looking at some challenges and opportunities, what to watch in the space, as we've talked about. So market size and liquidity, that's going to be, as we've talked about, a very key part in making sure that voluntary carbon markets develop, ensuring that there's enough participation for a functional market, and that markets are sufficiently mature and deep and have the correct type of infrastructure to deal with increased volume and increased maturity will be key. And then price stability, mechanisms to manage price volatility, such as reserve prices or price ceilings, will be key. Creating what the task force on scaling voluntary carbon markets calls a simplified buyer experience. So where buyers have more tools to manage and deal with their purchases over a longer term without worrying about the issues that can come with more volatile, immature markets. Integrating with international markets, there's clearly huge untapped potential in lots of carbon markets in the world, Kenya being amongst them, and making sure that these principles allow for integration and respectability on the international stage is going to be key in terms of making sure that there's lots of potential for these markets to continue growing. A core carbon reference contract is something that's increasingly being discussed, and it's a growing hope within some voluntary carbon market circles that there can be core carbon contracts that provide a daily price signal and more supplier financing. So that's one contract that pegs a daily price in the spot or a future contract looking forward. And this will concentrate the liquidity that we've talked about that's so crucial to the development of the carbon markets, and will allow suppliers to access carbon credits more readily rather than requiring a kind of bespoke solution every time. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, is supporting decarbonisation efforts, ensuring that as markets develop and grow more mature, they do so in a way that continues to support global decarbonisation efforts, considering we all know under the appropriate climate scenarios that voluntary carbon credits are going to be required, even in the most ambitious decarbonisation scenarios. It's obviously crucial that as we see these voluntary carbon markets develop, they do so in a way that continues to support emission reduction and decarbonisation. So that's it. Wolf, do you want to do a brief conclusion, or should we cover that off now? But that's all from my section. Let us know if you have any questions, and we can collate them and answer them after the session if necessary. But hopefully you enjoyed that overview and background to the role of certification in carbon credits markets and the international best practices on carbon regulation. And this is the last of the 3 sessions that Wolf, I, and our colleagues at A&O Shearman will be giving this time around. But we hope you found all of them very useful. And we'd like to express our thanks to Teresa and the East African Wildlife Society for inviting us down. So, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ned. That was a very insightful session, and we do hope that our speakers, our audience has had gained some insight. Perhaps, I don't know how much time you have. We could allow just another 5 minutes to ask a few questions and respond. Is that okay with you, or you are held up?
I'll defer to Wolf on this one, but we can always. I see there's a lot of questions in the chat function. So I think on the last session, we collated questions, didn't we, and answered them or dealt with them afterwards. So considering the short time span, it might be more appropriate to collate any questions from the chat function, and then we can deal with them. Think about them, deal with them in the appropriate time rather than rushing them now. What do you have any views, Wolf?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to. I've sort of tracked a few questions which I'm happy to sort of answer briefly now. And if for whatever reason I haven't answered your question, then very happy to answer in writing as a follow-up. So I've seen a couple of questions relating to whether ISO standards are a carbon credit certification tool. The short answer is no. So ISO standards are not such certification tools themselves, but they instead are frameworks or guidelines to provide best practices for managing environmental impact, including greenhouse gas emissions. Some ISO standards could be used as part of a broader process in carbon management, which might be aligned with or support carbon credit certification, but the ISO standards themselves don't constitute any such certification, but they would run alongside. I saw another question from James, which was relating to whether I think any carbon credit certification boards mandate having specific insurance or compensation policies as part of the certification process. And again, the answer is not explicitly, but it does slightly vary between each of the boards on the approach they take here. Some of the boards, such as Vero, which is probably the largest with the VCS, require there to be what they call a buffer pool, whereby the project developer needs to set aside a certain percentage of their credits as a buffer against risks like natural disasters and such as wildfires or diseases. Others are more vague and will just require the project developer to have a robust risk management plan, and that might self-include insurance. But I'm not aware of any that specifically mandate you have to have insurance in place, but they have sort of various different approaches to essentially having sort of some sort of form of synthetic insurance. I am very aware that we're nearly up on time. I'll just answer a couple more very quickly. I saw one from Johnson, who asked how long did certification take from project design to issuance, and the answer there is it really can vary quite a lot. Generally, you're probably looking at anywhere from 1.5 years up to 4 years. It will vary hugely depending on the nature of the project and the scope of the project, this complexity of the project, but also the certification body used, and the local regulations in place. So again, apologies for the vague answer, but in reality, it very much is that it just depends. Apologies if I missed any other questions, but obviously happy to answer any in follow up in writing. And perhaps Teresa and your colleagues, you can collate any that you are sent, and we'd be happy to answer them in writing. But as Ned said, thank you all very much for your time. It's been a pleasure to speak to you, and we hope you enjoyed the session.
Thank you very much, Wilf and Ned, for that session. And yes, we do want to confirm that we are going to collate the questions and share them with you so that we can share the same responses to our online participants. I want to take this opportunity to thank very much International Lawyers Project and Shearman and Sterling LLP for delivering our first phase of the basic training. And we hope that depending on the interest and the need, as partners, we can work together to develop a fully fledged training program on carbon trading to be domiciled under the East African Wildlife Society Climate Change and Biodiversity portfolio. We hope that our participants, especially those who've been here from the first session, have had a clear understanding of key concepts about carbon trading. They now better understand policy and regulatory frameworks, including standards and protocols on carbon trading. They're able to leverage on technologies and innovations in carbon offset projects and trading. They have an understanding of carbon market mechanisms, including the emerging trends, future outlook, and stakeholders' roles. And we hope that eventually you'll be in a position to develop and implement carbon offset projects. And up until then, we want to also invite you to become a member of the East African Wildlife Society. You can join as a corporate, individual, or at family level. You can also share with us an article on Swara Magazine if you have experience on carbon trading issues. You could support us by buying merchandise or become part of the Forest Challenge that is upcoming in November 30th. And we also hope that you can get to join our conservation talks in Relofla that happen after every 3 months, or you can become a member of Kenya Forest Working Group or Kenya Wetlands Forum to continue lobbying and advocating for conservation. We have an evaluation form for you to fill in. This, of course, will all go towards helping improve our future sessions. If you were to rate yourself if this was an exam, what grade would you get? You can tell us in the chat box. Nonetheless, we are very grateful that you found time to join us, and we appreciate very much the positive feedback you've shared all along from the beginning. I want to, if Maria is here, is she here with us? Is there anyone from ILP?
Yes. Hello.
Okay.
I'll speak on behalf of Maria. Thank you so much, Teresa. So we at ILP, we would like to thank the speakers, the excellent speakers for the presentation today. It was a really insightful discussion on a complex topic. And thank you to the East African Wildlife Society for hosting this event. And we at the ILP are always happy to provide pro bono legal assistance and support to your organization. And thank you all for the participation. And we hope you enjoy this series of the webinars. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Keita. At this juncture, I would like to close the meeting, and we look forward to engaging with you all. East African Wildlife Society has space for each and every one of you, so feel free to join us at any moment in time. Thank you very much, Wilf and Ned, for taking us through this session today. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.